Hey, welcome to my booth. I'm Jay. This is a somewhat special or unorthodox subscriber feedback in that it's not a Thursday. And also, Chris here is a booth buddy, so I wanted to get this back to him ASAP. A booth buddy just means that Chris is a paying member of this YouTube channel and or a member of the Buy Me a Coffee community that I've set up. That's linked down below. You can check out the member thing. I'll put the Buy Me a Coffee thing over here if you want to check it out. In both cases, it's just if you want to offer your support to these efforts above and beyond the usual, hey, click the buttons on the YouTube. It helps me out, which it really does, and I appreciate it. But if you want to go above and beyond, I appreciate those who have done so far. It really does mean a lot. That's not a plug. And a quick disclaimer, nothing on this channel will ever be members only unless it's something that I need to make members only simply to restrict like a class size type deal to improve the experience of it, or if I need to protect my time in some fashion. And those would be the only two ways in which I see now that being necessary, but otherwise, the whole reason for this channel is when I was starting out, I had no idea what I was doing. And it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of failure, a lot of wasted hours, and I didn't feel like I could ask anybody any questions. I didn't know what questions to ask, and I ended up having to pay a lot of people a lot of money to ask those questions just to chase a dream. And I didn't think or feel that anybody should have to do this alone, should have to do it. Anyway, I didn't think anybody should have to go through what I went through by themselves again, hence this place. So, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Enough of that spiel. If you like this stuff and find it helpful, click the buttons. So Chris here has some questions about specifically the engineering that's going into his audio here. He feels that he has a boomy bass and a metallic-y sound and is looking for suggestions on how to potentially improve or fix that. So we'll give it a listen and see what we can do. We got 2 samples to work through.
Powell was on a morning flight to Bucharest, uncertain if he was going to be able to locate Dmitri, who he was intent on eliminating.
Very ominous. Look out, Dmitri. Let's listen to a bit of this one.
Destinations, waypoints, markers in time, each coordinate a clue, each legend a link.
Okay, cool. So, Chris, a couple things that I think will help right out of the gate, processing completely aside. Firstly, it sounds to me like perhaps your room could be treated a little bit better or more completely. In this first sample, as you stop speaking here, I just hear a little bit of room reflection.
Light to Bucharest.
And so I think treating your space a little bit more will help with that. And for lower frequencies, thicker materials are better. Lower sound frequencies have longer waves, whereas higher frequency literally means how quickly they oscillate back and forth in terms of sound frequency. So low frequencies go woo, and high frequencies, they bounce back and forth a lot. So high frequency ones don't need a lot of material to get absorbed or are absorbed better by thinner materials, and lower frequency stuff are absorbed better by thicker materials. So if you use thicker stuff like a old comforter, a lot of people will use like 4 inches of insulation inside brackets. Lots of really great ideas, but those will help to both attenuate or tame the bassy sounds you're getting, but will also help to treat your room a little bit better. I've got a video here on Your First Booth, I think is what it's called, that gives a lot of principles on that sort of thing, if that's something you're interested in. The other thing I'm hearing, I don't know how far away you are from your microphone, but it sounds like you might be a little closer than you need to be. For example, if I get really close to my microphone, you notice that my voice, the lower end of it, starts to beef up pretty significantly. Now, that can be attractive and fun to play with a lot of times, but because you're calling that out as something that you want to fix, If you are close to your microphone, I would just pull back a little bit. Two things that help me, I use either a thumb and a fist or a hang loose. In both cases, I'll plop my thumb right beneath my lower lip and just measure to the microphone. And this way I always have a consistent distance, but I also know that I'm not too close. And then a hang loose is about the same. And you notice already that right here, hang loose away, the lower tones of my voice are dropping off pretty significantly. And as I get closer, the lower end starts to really beef up a lot. So those two things, treating your room a little bit more and maybe increasing the distance from your microphone a little bit, will both help the lower frequencies of sound. It does also sound as though you've processed this audio already. A couple of things that can contribute to amplifying unpleasant frequencies. I don't think that your low end here is unpleasant, but if you're compressing your audio a fair amount, and it doesn't sound overly compressed, but as I compress, the low end of one's voice or prominent frequencies tend to become more dominating if you compress a lot. So as an example, if I really drive this compressor, I start to get really quiet, so I have to turn this up a lot. But then as I compensate for my sound and bring the volume back up, you start to hear a lot more. And at least to my ear with this compression, the lower end of my voice does sound more prominent. And then if I pull it back down, it sounds more balanced and more natural, to my ear at least. Let me get this back to normal. So those are two things in terms of the processing that may be affecting it. But all of that aside, if you want to treat this sound as is, or if I'm completely wrong and this is raw audio, we'll walk through how I would EQ this. Now, for anybody else that may be watching, if you don't know how to use an EQ, or if you start to feel lost as I'm explaining things, I have a video, how to use EQ for VoiceOver, on my channel here that goes in depth on all of this stuff I'm talking about. So if you feel yourself lost, go watch that and come back, and you should be up to speed with a pretty good foundation of what I'm talking about. So the one I'll use to demonstrate a lot of stuff will be this Nectar 3 plugin, but all EQs do the same thing in different ways. And so it doesn't really matter what EQ you choose to use necessarily. You can have a favorite. I do. This one tends to be my favorite. But don't feel you need to buy this one. Again, the reason I'm using it is it allows us to visually see what's going on. A disclaimer on that: never use the visual side of things to make your decisions. Always make your final decisions based upon your ears rather than what you're seeing, because this is sound after all. So we'll play this audio a little bit, and I'll just treat this. I'll go from start to finish on how I would tame the low end of your recording here. So to start with, we'll just listen to it with nothing going on.
Powell was on a morning flight to Bucharest.
Okay. Now, you said you have a high-pass filter at 60 hertz. So let's start there. We'll put this at 60 hertz and listen to what's going on.
Powell was on a morning flight to Bucharest.
So I think you could move this high-pass filter up to about 80. And the reason I'm saying that is, firstly, most high-pass filters stock, for example, the one that's here on my, on my Apollo interface, that one starts at 75 or 80 hertz. And I can't recall which number is correct, but one of the two. And so just by engaging that, you're taming that. And the reason I think that it's a good idea to bring this up is if we look at the sound here, you can see that there are these big old peaks of sound happening in the low end. And those are the things that you are hearing in the boomy, bassy sound. So If, as a demonstration, I solo this frequency band, meaning we'll only be hearing this range of sound, let's listen to what we can actually hear. I hear almost no information there. And what I mean by information is if I drag this frequency up arbitrarily to really any frequency in a higher register, we start to hear words, we start to hear language. And so my point here is because there is not really any information in this low end, it's just adding noise, for lack of a better term. It's body without a lot of substance. By increasing your high-pass filter a little bit, you're taming that and tapering out some of those bassy sounds that don't contain the words necessarily, just the sounds. So you can move your high-pass filter up to about 80 starting there. Now, in terms of frequency sweeping and finding resonant frequencies, again, my process for that, you boost the gain here, you turn the Q really high, and we'll play the audio and just sweep this up and down, listening for when sounds become bell-like or particularly harsh, unpleasant, or resonant in some way. I'll go a step further and solo this just so that we can really hear the frequency we're listening to. And the frequency sweep is exactly what we're doing here, so I hope that was clear. So let's dig in. So here, that sounds like a pretty hefty resonant peak to me. And again, we'll do a quick A, B. So there's no resonance here, but you notice if we go back to where we found it, it starts to get really like almost like you're in a tunnel, like there's just a lot of extra stuff going on. So once we found that, we'll drop the gain to about -2.5 to -3 dB. You never want to go too sharp because then it sounds overly processed, at least in my opinion. Different strokes for different folks, but this is my way. And then I widen this out again because gentle stuff works better, in my opinion. So that's one resonant frequency. Let's find one more, just for good measure. And yeah, we'll solo this. So again, we've turned the gain up. We've made the Q really sharp, so we are hearing specific frequencies of sound. I'm going to solo this yet again, so that we can hear exactly what we're listening to. And we're going to sweep as we play. So that one sounds pretty hefty resonance as well. So again, we'll solo off, drop to about -2 to -3, and widen out this Q a little bit. So now we'll do just kind of a before and after, an A-B comparison deal. I'll just click this on and off. So pay attention to if it's dark, off, or, colored in, then it's on. And we'll see if we can actually hear this stuff.
Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller.
So what this is doing is just taming out a little bit of the extra bass sounds that Chris is dealing with. If we wanted to go further or to make it a little bit more extreme, we'll just take these down for demonstration purposes even more, so you can really hear what it's specifically aiming at.
Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller.
So that's obviously very extreme, and we wouldn't want to go that far, but that's just to demonstrate what this is doing more or less. So we'll bring this back up. Now, this is the cleaner or more surgical way to go about it. If you don't want to mess with this, don't want to mess with sweeping through frequencies, don't want to mess with finding the different resonances, if that's not something you're comfortable with, firstly, more power to you. Simple is almost always better in almost all cases. So this is another way that you could approach it. We'll open up another EQ. I'm going to turn this one off. Again, we're going to pull this high pass up to 80 hertz like we had. But instead of hunting out resonant frequencies, we're just going to add a low shelf. And what's a shelf, you ask? Exactly as it describes. It's a shelf of some sort. And what we're going to do is just drop that by about 2.5, 3 dB and let it ride. And this will effectively just temper all of the lower frequencies of sound. And we'll do a quick A/B on this one as well.
Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller.
Okay, now let's do an A/B between the surgical version of the EQ and the easier version, just to see if it matters to us that much.
Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller. Powell was assuming the role of human pest controller.
Anyhow, those are just two slightly different approaches to tackling the same issue. Now, I'm always cautious about giving people preset numbers in terms of things like this. And the reason is simply that things change. If you've already processed this audio and you decide to change anything that I don't know about, the numbers I give you are not doing you any favors. Additionally, if your microphone changes, your environment changes, if you change, if you have a resonant moment and you're enjoying it versus not, there are so many variables that working off of a preset is something that should be used with caution. So I don't do that very often, is offer people presets really for that reason in and of itself. I would much rather equip you with the tools to do things on your own should these changes be necessary. So if you have more questions about it, Chris, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk more about this. But there's that. One small note on the metallic-y sound, just because I spent a lot of time on the bass to demonstrate this stuff. On the higher, those sounds will be in the higher registers here, the higher frequencies, and you can use much the same principle. And I would use a wider band in this case because you're not searching for specific bands of frequency that are causing issues. You're just listening out for things that you don't like. It's an aesthetic choice. That's the word I'm looking for. So if we play this a little bit, we can just listen out.
He didn't think of it in terms of murder, although the authorities would consider it so, but the removing of a vile and evil menace.
And just doing an A/B, do I like it when I'm blasting this a lot, or do I like it when I'm cutting? This is, of course, something that should be used with caution and very, very sparingly, because if you start adding a bunch of things where you're like, I really like this frequency up here, but I really like this one really cut, and then it becomes overly tweaked. And if you end up working with someone who says, we love your sound, and you have to go back and say, great, here's the specific way that you need to use EQ to make me sound like that, you just run into trouble. So that's just another word of caution with processing in general as well. But again, Chris, if you have more questions, please feel free to let me know. And for everybody else, I hope this was helpful for you too. And again, form in the description if you want to send me audio like this. Let's do this again. Until the next one of these, be well, everybody, and I'll see you there. Toodles.